The media tends to focus just on difficult things that can't help but make us feel stressed about our world. But again, it isn't all that's there. If we'll just look up and see the richness, the fullness of everything that exists.
Hey guys, it's Seth, and welcome out to another episode of Look Up and Move Forward. Now this show is basically conversations that I have with a good friend of mine named Carrie M. Wrigley. And Carrie is a licensed therapist. She's been doing therapy work for over 30 years. I think a lot of us right now are really struggling with anxiety and depression about the future, and what's going to happen and how to move forward. You know, instead of me pontificating about thoughts I'm not really sure I'm qualified to have, it would be better if I had a discussion with someone who's actually done a lot of groundwork, has lots of experience in working with people who are struggling with depression and anxiety, and offering practical steps and practical ways and means in which we all can move forward. And as an added bonus, this is a way I get free therapy. Don't tell Carrie. And I will say it is a joy for me personally to edit these episodes, right? I get to listen to them like 3 or 4 times, and it's not a burden to me to listen to them again and again and again. In fact, if anything, it has improved the quality of my life, even in the midst of all of this really intense bickering and fighting and division and uncertainty. It has been really refreshing and wonderful to listen to these episodes. And so I hope that these conversations, that the information and the stories and the ideas and the concepts that we present in this and all the other episodes, I really truly sincerely hope that they benefit your life, because there are a lot of people who are rooting for you to look up and move forward. Well, and with that, let's get on to episode 6. Hey Carrie, how are you?
I'm great. How are you, Seth?
I'm doing a lot better. By and large, it does feel like a lot of people are just taking a breath. Things are calming down. Anxieties have gone down quite a bit. So
Stock market is weirdly doing just fine.
Exactly. And there's apparently a vaccine for COVID floating around out there.
Uh-huh.
A lot of good news. And it reminded me of that. Our discussion last week where we were talking about, the jagged stone and looking too closely at just that jagged stone.
Yeah.
And you're focused on that one really hard image, and you're not seeing a broader image. And it made me a little angry, I guess, at the media, because they've been laser focused on basically in the United States, they've been focused on COVID and the election. And now those two things are sort of fading into the background, more or less, and you realize, hey, what have I been doing for the past 6 months? I've been so obsessed over this, and what do I have to show for it? So I'm a little miffed at the media, but it did remind me of our discussion that we had about focusing on a larger picture.
Yeah. Well, again, the beautiful thing to recognize is that whatever the media shows us, we can decide what we're going to focus on, So a friend of mine a number of years ago, when I was giving a similar talk and focusing on some similar things, created this series of images that I think, captures really well this idea that certainly the media and ourselves, if we get into a dark space, can get really myopic. It's like you can see this very, very close up, zoomed in view of this little rock. It's smaller than a man's hand. You can see this man holding this rock in his hand, and there's all these ugly little demarcations, and it's gray and it's jagged and it's just not pretty at all. and it's just kind of blurry behind it. And I think that's a really great representation for what tends to happen when we get in those dark spots of our lives. You know, whenever I've talked to somebody who's really depressed, and especially suicidal, that's exactly how they're seeing. It's just like they're looking at that one teeny tiny little horrible problem in their life, or they're a weakness in themselves or in a loved one or a situation they don't know how, and that's all they could think about. That's all that they're focused on. And that is part of what creates the distress. It's just like, all I see is darkness. And even the thing that they're looking at, they don't see terribly clearly, just like we're not seeing the background of this rock very clearly. And unfortunately, that is also what the media, meaning the news media, tends to do. It's like, let's focus on everything that's dark and distressing and conflicted and terrible, and let's not even focus on everything else, you know. But as we talked about a number of times in this podcast, that certainly isn't our only option. It isn't all that exists. So in this series of slides, you know, you can see in this next little slide a little bit more perspective of what's behind that rock. And then in this one, you're seeing it more and more, that the rock is still there, but it's getting smaller and smaller. And what you see behind it is this glorious multicolored background of blue snow-capped mountains and red rocks in southern Utah. Then finally, this last sequence, it comes into full color. There on the bottom right, you can see this teeny tiny little hand with that little rock. It's still
I didn't
there.
even notice it. I didn't even see it was there. Yeah.
I know. It's still there. And certainly we could crop the thing out and not even see it anymore, you know?
Yeah.
But look what else has been there all the time in that image, you know, all the time. But we were so focused on that little myopic, terrible thing that we didn't even see it. So the contrast between seeing like this and seeing like this, seeing the tiny little problem versus seeing the large, full color, full perspective reality can mean a huge difference for us, both in our personal mental health and also in our community health. When we see the whole big picture and all the, you know, certainly the bad, difficult things, but also the wonderful things, the happy things, the hopeful things, then we can be certainly, you know, a lot more emotionally stable in general.
You know, there's a psychologist that I like to listen to a lot, and he was talking about our natural inclination as human beings. And he comes from a more of a secular background. He says, you know, it fascinates me that we have a natural inclination to look at negative and distressing things. I mean, the media preys off of that.
Yeah.
They certainly do for clickbait, right? They prey off of that. And it's our natural inclination because, you know, as you know, perhaps in evolution, we had to look for potentially life-threatening situations. So that was ingrained within us. We had to be able to identify situations that were potentially harmful for us.
Yeah,
and so,
an instinctual survival mechanism.
Yeah, a survival mechanism. But then he made this interesting point, which I think is incredibly hopeful. But he didn't even categorize it as something was hopeful. But he said, so it interests me that our natural inclination is to look for everything that's going wrong, to look for the fearful, to look for just what's going to explode. Like that's what we're looking for. And it fascinates me that the course of human history has actually been contrary to that. It's been contrary to the laws of entropy, which is that basically everything is going to devolve into chaos. Like human history has actually been very hopeful. It has had dark periods, but it's moved forward towards progress, towards light, towards hope, towards peace, all of those things. And I thought that was very hopeful to just think of that. Like, yeah, even though there is a ton of negativity, there is ample evidence that things will work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you think too about the difference between our, you know, earlier ancestors, where there was the occasional bear or the occasional, you know, invader from the other country, or what, you know, the occasional rattlesnake. Whereas that's not what we're dealing with anymore, you know. And our bodies, our bodies and brains are programmed to respond to a threat, to respond with adrenaline and with cortisol, the stress hormone. And, and under the influence of those things, we naturally get more air and our heart beats faster and all that kind of stuff, which when there's just the occasional bear or the occasional invader or the occasional snake, that's okay. But the world that we're living in now is, through our eyes and ears, through these things, pretty much every second of every day, we're informed of all of these terrible things happening in everywhere around the world and all these uncertainties. And all. So it's like a constant stream of cortisol. And that's in addition to how many of us live our lives, which is from crisis and from pressure to pressure and from task to task and all this kind of stuff. And so we're just overloaded constantly with cortisol without a break, without that stress hormone. And so it was designed to be something that comes up every so often in the face of an occasional threat. By and large, I think that's one of the reasons that we have such an influx right now of anxiety, because everybody is stressed every minute of every day, because again, we're constantly looking and we're constantly being exposed to the things that are going wrong and not focus enough on the things that we can do to help, the things that are positive, the things that are going on that are right, even though there's more of them.
Which is why it's probably good counsel to turn down the media to the extent possible, particularly the news, because they focus so much on the negative.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've thought so much over the years about that very sad and very important day in our nation's history in the United States, and really that affected the world, that was 9/11, September 11th, 2001, where obviously we faced as a nation a severe crisis, a severe attack. But even in 2001, even on the very day that was happening, I remember feeling concerned, because the way that it was represented was we saw that image or something like it multiple times that day. Oh no, this building is going down. And then, no, this building is going down. And then, an hour later, oh, this building went down, this building went down. And 2 days later, this building went down, and we were constantly seeing this image of these buildings that were attacked and destroyed and went down. But you know what we didn't see pretty much that whole year on the media, or pretty much for years afterwards? We didn't see all the buildings, even on that very day, that didn't go down. It was a terrible tragedy what happened in New York City that day. But even in New York City, there were still other things left standing, And if you think about just the richness, the Eiffel Tower, it's still there. The Colosseum, still there. Windsor Castle, still there. Pyramids of Egypt, still there. The Tower of London, still there. Disneyland, still there. Hawaii, still there. Places of worship, still there. We don't see pictures of those things. We don't see pictures of those things that are still standing, still good, still functional. The media tends to focus just on those dark, depressing, sad, discouraging, difficult things that can't help but make us feel stressed about our world. But again, it isn't all that's there. We have such a richness of experience in our individual lives and in our shared lives if we'll just look up and see the richness, the fullness of everything that exists, rather than just focus on the negative things.
It was interesting. One of my, out of that really dark and difficult time, 9/11, I mean, of course, I vividly remember that day that happened. But one of my, I don't know how you categorize this. It's not a favorite story. Probably one of the most touching stories was a story of a man who miraculously he got tickets to a baseball game, and he decided he was just going to go with his wife the night before 9/11. Mm-hmm. And he got them. It was a work gift that he got, and so he said, okay, well, I'm going to take the day off of work. It was the night before. So he said, I'm going to go, and then I'll take the day off of work the next day. So you know how that story ends, is that the next day, 9/11 happens, and he's seeing it. I mean, they struck his office building. That was where one of the planes went through. And he, when he talked about it and when he described it afterwards, he just, he was very emotional about it. And I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. But he went to a baseball game with his wife, and he says afterwards that, the only thing he can think about now is just how grateful he is for all of the extra innings in his life.
that he gets to see, and it doesn't take away, obviously there's a lot of grief, that he had for losing his coworkers, but certainly there was this element within him that he looked up, at all of the extra innings that he was able to have in his own life.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point, that even in the darkest, most traumatic, most difficult circumstances of our lives, there's always some kind of silver lining. It's been amazing as a counselor to hear people tell stories like that, stories of being through trauma or through abuse or through suicidal depression or through whatever it might be. But always, every time, there's some sort of compensating, balancing element, that gets that person through, that is a lesson or a blessing or a growth experience or the seed of a fantastic new creative idea. It's legendary, of course, that songwriters do their best, write their best songs out of their most difficult, heartbreaking experiences. I've had the opportunity the last few years to get involved in the film acting community here in Utah, and I've become acquainted with some of the really finest actors community, and without exception, they've all been through hell, just absolutely terrible experiences. But the fact that they've been through hell means they know what it feels like, what it looks like, and they've climbed their way through it. And the richness that those people have, all the way from the lowest lows, the blackest blacks, all the way to the lightest lights, the hope and finding joy in things, and whatever, the richness of those people is what makes them so electric on screen. That's fundamental, I think, for all of the arts. The expression of our whole range of human experience, from the darkest sides to the lightest sides, is ultimately, what makes life so balanced, so exciting, and ultimately such a rich growth experience, if we have the eyes to see it.
Yeah, and that was the story of James Taylor. James Taylor, the musician. I love 70s music. I'm a huge fan of 70s music, and James Taylor's songs are almost all of them are very soothing, very relaxing, very calming. And I never knew this. I never thought to look up his story, but he actually spent a considerable amount of time in his early 20s in what was described institutionalized in a way. It was voluntary, yeah, but he was really struggling, and that is where he picked up the guitar.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I never knew that. And again, you think about all this beautiful music that comes from this man who's just very mild-mannered, very calm. He's a good performer. It came from this really dark experience in his life. He would not have picked up that guitar had it not happened.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, we see it all through nature. You get the beautiful sunrise after the dark night. You get the beautiful rainbow after the threatening storm, and so on. You get the sweet young child after a horrific childbirth travail experience. In so many ways, the very best of life follows the very worst of life. And so when we're in the very worst pieces, when we're in the black, dark, difficult, stressful, anxiety-producing times, sometimes that's enough to get us through. It's like, okay, I know where I am. This is the worst part, and the best part is soon to come. So I just hang in there, rather than, oh no, it's going to be like this forever, which is where sometimes we go instead.
Yeah. So then, how would you counsel someone who's sort of stuck in this idea that life is gray and depressing and it's never going to get better?
For almost everybody I know, both my clients and family members and everybody else I know, including myself, since March, we've been in pretty gray, difficult, circumstances of losing things that we love, not being able to be around people that we liked, not being able to do things that used to bring us joy, being cut off from so many parts of life. My son, when he came home from college, he was having a great experience, at college, living in dorms with some guys he really liked and stuff. And when COVID hit last March and he came home and started having to do online school, what he said about that experience, I think, has been true for so many of us, about our lives in general. He said, it's kind of like they took everything that was great about school, everything that was fun, everything that was social, everything that was uplifting, and got rid of it. And they kept everything that was stressful and yucky, and they kept that. So,
Yeah.
and I thought that in general, and I think in many ways, that's exactly what's happened to so many of our lives. You know, our work is more stressful, our school is more stressful, our families are more stressful. And so on a daily basis, I have, you know, my clients as well as family members and others ask me those kinds of questions. Well, it was actually a couple of weeks ago with a particular client, a young father like you, who had a paso little kids, and they're trying to manage homeschool, and they're trying to manage just the normal, you know, challenges of the day, and they're still trying to, you know, make a living, and they're, you know, and they don't have the outside supports that they normally have had. He was feeling really, really overwhelmed, you know, and just feeling like life was just a constant drain, feeling constantly stressed and anxious and overwhelmed and stuff like that. So as we kind of counseled about that together, we came up with a model that I've ended up sharing with almost all my clients since then, and with family members, and have, you know, taken to using it myself. Because it basically helps us to think through how can we most effectively, most productively, proactively use this time that we're dealing with. And we're going to talk about this concept that I've come to call spectrum scheduling. Okay. Now, all of us over the course of our days and different seasons of our lives and stuff have what we might think of as the red zone, you know, different tasks, things to do, different responsibilities that are hard, that are difficult, that feel like just straight uphill, right? You know, they're difficult. Arguably in these last few months, we're having more and more of those reds, you know, more and more of those things that are difficult. And then we might think about something we could perhaps call the blue zone. These are tasks that are easier. They still need to be done. They're not necessarily fun, but at least they're, you know, they're kind of more level playing field. They're not uphill like the first tasks. Now, sometimes, you know, what I find is people in my practice, like this young father, he was getting lost in the red zone. You know, it was like, now I need to go to work. Now I need to shovel the snow. Now I need to deal with my 2-year-old that just, you know, dumped all of the toys all over the entire living room again. Now I need to spank so-and-so for beating up on his sister. Now I need to
are you sure this isn't me? This sounds like me.
You know, and different versions. You know, no matter where we are in the process of life, we can get stuck in this thing of hard task after hard task after hard task after hard task. And then we wonder why we get burned out, because it's like there's nothing to sort of balance that. Well, you know, I found at the very least, if we can kind of balance the tasks so that we do hard things, but then we deal with something that's not quite as hard, you know, intentionally, we like schedule it that way, you know. But as you probably can guess from this little empty space, there's a third zone that I like to think about, which is the yellow zone. Fun activities, things that aren't tasks. They're not burdensome, hard things. You can kind of think of this as the downhill piece of our life adventure, you know. These are things that regenerate our spirits. They're things that make us happy. They're things that bring joy into our lives, you know. And if we're not careful, just like my son described about school, the yellow zone can be completely eliminated from our lives. And if we focus just on, you know, those other two zones, or especially on the red zone, we can get pretty distressed pretty fast, pretty overwhelmed, you know. But if we intentionally sequence hard tasks with easier tasks, with fun things, then we can kind of keep ourselves going. Just a couple of days ago, I went on a hike with my son, with my older son. And this is a boy who loves to mountain bike and loves to, you know, he's very, very physical. I always think I'm in pretty good shape until I go do these adventures with my older son. You're like, oh, I'm gonna die, you know? So he took me out because he mountain bikes. He says, I don't want to just go on some lame-o little easy adventure. If I'm going to hike, I want to do something that's going to be that I couldn't do on a bike, you know? And so he took me to this mountain. It was about a 4-hour adventure where we ended up going straight uphill, you know, for periods of it. And it was hard. It was red zone hiking, you know?
Yeah.
But then every so often, you know, in that uphill climb, there would be like these periods that are just kind of, you know, moving forward sort of on a flat line, you know, maybe even nice little paths. It wasn't climbing straight up boulders like, you know, the red zone stuff. And it was kind of this nice period to just kind of catch our breaths. We were still moving up that mountain, but it was kind of just nice. And then finally we got to the top of the mountain and it was beautiful. It was worth it. It was just this beautiful panorama and this gorgeous lake. And we're so glad we made that climb together, and our muscles are hurting and the wind is blowing. It's really fierce, but it's like, yeah, we did it, you know? And then, of course, we got to go down the mountain. And that alternated between periods of, actually going down,
Yeah.
was the yellow zone, and those flat periods, and so we kind of alternated with that, and it was manageable. And I was thinking about this little spectrum scheduling the whole time that I was on that climb with them, because again, if it continued to just be boulder after boulder and steepness after steepness, and there came a point I told him, Mike, I don't know if I can keep going much longer, because my muscles were literally going like this. So we'd kind of stop for a little bit, we'd get a little bit of water, we just catch our breath a little bit, and then we'd head up, and fortunately then it kind of calmed down a little bit. But again, I think so many of us just live our lives in the red zone. And then we wonder why we get burned out. And we wonder why we're not productive. And we wonder why we yell at everybody all the time, because we're so overwhelmed and so exhausted. So being able to intentionally plug in the yellow zone, intentionally plan for pieces, that are easy. I'll just give you an example from my personal life. Again, I don't have little kids home anymore, but I definitely have been dealing on some red zone activities the last couple of days. I'm learning, really complicated new software programs, and that is not fun to me. I have sons that's really fun for them. It's not fun for me. It's like climbing those boulders. It's steep uphill, and I have to do it because it's part of my work. It's part of how I get my message out, but it's not fun.
Yeah.
What we're doing right now, I would say, is a blue zone thing. It's an easier task. It's still work. It's still a responsibility, but there's no question. It's more fun. It's more relaxing than studying those intense software manuals, right?
Yeah.
And then, when we're done with this, I'm going to go to the gym, and I'm going to watch a show with my husband, and I'm going to go do something fun with my son,
Yeah.
And so being able to alternate, and then, later this afternoon, I'll get back to another red zone task, because there's still a few more things I need to program and things I need to learn. But I found for myself, when I think of my life that way, in alternating between those different stripes of experience, if you will, it's a lot more manageable, and it's a lot more fun, and it's a lot more fulfilling.
It was interesting. This morning, you tried to call me so we could prep for this interview.
Yeah.
And I sent you a little clip of what my situation was at that exact moment. The kids, you saw, the kids were running around. I've got 4 kids under the age of 4.
Right.
And they were running around. They were jumping on the bed. My daughter had a sweater that was halfway on her body. She thought it was so funny. She was giggling and laughing. It was pure pandemonium. I'll tell you what, I was stressed from the night before because they weren't sleeping and I wanted to sleep. And so I was getting really angry. Like in the morning routine was not my happy hour. Like I was not happy at all. And then something clicked. It was the weirdest thing. Something clicked and just said, you won't have these moments with these kids very often. Like one day you will miss this. And so I went and got, there were these glow in the dark stars that I've been meaning to put up in my daughter's bedroom for nighttime, because at night she doesn't have a nightlight, but it would be, she loves little stars that glow. So we were going to put them up on the ceiling and on the wall so that it kind of, it's like her nightlight, just all these stars. My son loves the moon. He's always telling us about the moon whenever he sees it. And so I had the 3, I call them the oldest, but they're still under 4, but the 3 oldest kids, they were in that room that you saw that I was in. And I just kept giving them star after star and sticker after sticker, and they were putting them up. It was horrible. They were doing a horrible job, but we were all putting them up and listening to music. And I will tell you what, I haven't been that happy in a very long time. Yeah. And the symbolism was not lost on me, because when the night comes tonight and it gets dark, there will be these little stars that my kids and I, these little lights that my kids and I put up together. This hope and this joy for the future.
Yeah. When I was a young mom, in kind of the same situation that you're in now as a young parent with lots of young kids, I heard a talk one time that really changed my life, and it kind of reminds me of your story, where this guy was, he was out trying to pick raspberries with his kids, and his intention was to get enough raspberries he could bring them home and his wife could make lovely raspberry jam to get him through the winter. Well, kids being what they are, they got out there and they were eating half the raspberries and pretty much throwing the other half. And he was getting really frustrated. He's just like, oh, we don't have any raspberry jam. And then finally, he remembered something that somebody had said in a talk just the week before to him, which was the goal of the task is to strengthen the relationship. And he realized, it's kind of like you said, I won't have these kids forever, and ultimately my time with my kids is way more important than jam, and raspberry jam or whatever else it is we might be focusing on. So he engaged with his kids and eating the raspberries. And then by the end of the day, they were out long enough. They ended up with at least some raspberries for jam, but more important, they ended up with this really, really beautiful, rich memory that years later, both he and the kids were able to draw from. Those intentionally planned experiences where we decide to create something happy for ourselves or our kids can be so powerful in our lives. And it really is mostly a matter of being aware of all the possibilities and intentionally planning on those, rather than just, again, focusing on the red zone, focusing on the things we have to do that are hard and the tasks that we have to accomplish and whatever, but making room for those other things. Because weirdly, we're a whole lot more productive, even in the red zone tasks, if we get those little breathers, if we have those happy moments, if we have those regenerative times. So as I've been exploring in my own life and with my family and clients, this whole idea of intentionally creating a happy, balanced life where we're still getting necessary things done, but we're also balancing that with things that keep us going, that regenerate us. I kind of expanded over the process of time this little model in ways that I found really enlightening for myself, and that I found useful with clients, family members, and others that I'm happy to share. So you can kind of think of that spectrum scheduling as kind of level 1, the starter pack. Again, red for hard tasks, blue for easier tasks, yellow for fun activity. But as I started to think about it, I realized some tasks, like learning Adobe right now, Adobe Acrobat, isn't just red for me. It's like dark red. It's like close to black. It's like hard.
Blood
right?
red. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I realized that there's kind of colors between the colors. And so that's how I ended up coming up with this second level of this, which we could call full spectrum healing. Look how many beautiful colors that is, So we still have the red, the blue, and the yellow. But it goes now from, the super hard, the black, just absolutely horrendous, barely can, get through the next breath kinds of experiences of our lives, from total black to like learning Adobe Acrobat, for me, very hard. I call that the burgundy task, to the red hard tasks, to, you could say, purple medium tasks that are harder than blue, but not as hard as red, to those easier tasks that we call blue, to tasks like right now, I would call this not even blue, I'd call it green. It's fun. I love talking to you, Seth. It's still a task, but it's a fun task,
That's good. That's good.
And then after that is the yellow, the fun activity that I plan to do after by going to the gym. And then, at the very end, we have kind of this, I call it ivory, just, times of rest, times of relaxation, times that really just kind of fill our spirits and our hearts, like listening to James Taylor music, for example.
Yeah.
And then finally, the opposite end of the spectrum, I had a few experiences like this week, the white times of vision, times of peace, times when you just kind of see things in a different perspective because your mind is so quiet. It's times of enlightenment, times of regeneration. And so we have the whole spectrum, this full spectrum scheduling, and I found it useful to think about this in my own time scheduling and in doing it with clients, with family and stuff. If I know that I've got a burgundy task coming up, or even a black difficult experience, I know that in order to get through that, I'm going to need to schedule in some of these things over here, some of the yellows, some of the beige, some of the ivory, rather than expecting myself or others to just push through black after black, burgundy after burgundy, just to factor that in. Now, the other piece of this, I realized that if we're not careful in our modern day world with all the media and the other pressures we have, we can very easily, rather than this whole spectrum, get caught in this. Alternating between just gray, joyless, meaningless work, doing tasks without really any real benefit from them, but just kind of getting through task after task, alternating with what I call the beige zone, just passive vegging, watching hour after hour on Netflix or on television or, video games or different things that just kind of make our brains turn off for a while and numb us out. And alternating between that, gray, joyless work and that beige passive vegging is unfortunately how a lot of people are living their lives right now, And I would invite every one of us to simply make the decision to move from that to this, to intentionally build in, plan for, proactively generate experiences on the full spectrum. Life is going to give us these things. We're going to have the blacks, the burgundies, the reds, the hard things, but we have the option, if we choose it, to intentionally build this full spectrum of life, of joy, of purpose, of productivity for ourselves and our loved ones. And it's basically when we move into that kind of a framework that we can really live out the promise of looking up, moving forward into a sweet and joyful life, even in the midst of some difficult circumstances at times.
Hey, thank you so much for watching this episode of Look Up and Move Forward. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a 5-star review and subscribe. If you don't, it will really hurt my feelings. I mean, honestly, I won't really know. I can't see if you subscribe or not. So really the most that is probably going to happen is you'll feel awkward if we ever see each other, like in a grocery store, just like on the street or something. If we pass each other, you'll feel awkward. The burden of it will be on you, and I just can't let you carry that burden. So go ahead and subscribe.